everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. So, as we're finishing up this unit here on voting and elections, it is important to talk about a little caveat to our legislative branch that has a massive influence on laws in our current government, and that's interest groups. So interest groups play a pivotal role, very important and possibly a little biased. I mean, they're designed to be biased, but possibly a little bit too much of a role in federal policy. And even though it happens at the state level, at the federal level, we're going to talk a lot about the federal level today, of the impact that interest groups play in shaping current laws and policies in the United States. All right, let's get started. All right, so interest groups. Doesn't take a, brain scientist to realize that this is probably a group of people that have a similar interest. And you would be correct. So we're going to start talking about interest groups and specific interest groups today and really what they've accomplished for their own goals. But before we get into the details of that, let's talk about specifically what is an interest group and what do they do. So an interest group is a group of people with the same interest, all right? Almost like a little minor political party. The difference, however, is that interest groups, instead of running for an office like political parties would and having elections, a lot of times interest groups go to the actual politicians themselves and try to have politicians, people in the Senate and the House of Representatives, kind of push through specific policies and encourage these representatives, whether they're in the Senate or the House of Representatives, to introduce bills that would benefit their specific interest. It's kind of weird, and we probably wouldn't talk about it if it wasn't so dang effective. Interest groups are pivotal. They're a very, very, very pivotal part of our government makeup. We're going to go through it and talk about it. When I say pivotal, I don't necessarily mean necessary, but they are an intricate part in our current fabric of the way our government works. So when we start talking about interest groups and lobbying, we'll talk about here at the end lobbying, what that term means and what a lobbyist is. But interest groups have a specific interest, and we're going to go through the different types of them, give you some examples of them, and some of the stuff that they've done. And usually the bigger ones are relatively popular. Interest groups influence policy by encouraging the already elected officials to pass policies, and then those elected officials usually get some type of benefit from it, whether it's promising that this entire interest group will vote for you in the next election or something like that. But there's a handful of different type of interest groups. So before I try to just explain this brand new concept to you on how they work, I feel like usually I'll learn best if I give you like specific examples of each one and kind of start from the small up as opposed to top down. So let's try that. So there are different types of interest groups, people that influence politics and laws. And we're going to start out here with private interest groups. So private interest groups are groups that are private. Duh, Mr. Wagstaff. Right. You actually have to be a member of something or somehow directly involved in something in order to be a part of these interest groups. Let's simplify. Let me just tell you some stories, and that should make what interest groups are a little more straightforward. So I realized as I started looking up emblems for all these different types of interest groups, they're all like a circle. I just thought that was an interesting thing. So all the symbols for these different interest groups are all a circle. So the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, or the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, is a very, very, very large scale and very well known private interest group. So what this group does, right, is they support this idea, they support benefits for big businesses. So I tried to go through and use some real examples here of these interest groups and basically what they're most known for, so some influential things that they have had passed in the past. So the U.S., and this is from their, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce special interest group. This is from their website. I tried to get stuff from the website of these special interest groups so that I don't, misstate what their means are. So it talks about the Trade Act of 1974 here with Gerald Ford really helped big business. All right. So special interest groups, what they're doing, like U.S. Chamber of Commerce, clearly went to a representative and was like, hey, we got this idea called the Trade Act. We would like you, representative that's been elected, to introduce this into Congress. All right. So sometimes special interest groups know exactly what they want to, and the congressman's like, what's in it for me? Or sometimes not as nefariously, the congressman's like, great, my district would absolutely love that as well. Let's try to get one together that everybody can agree on, and then it benefits the special interest group, and then it represents the representative, and then if it's voted on, it should represent everybody, since everybody has to agree with this. So that's an example of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Here's another special interest group, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, CIO, the AFL and the CIO, these are unions. Now, these private interest groups, you actually have to, in order to be part of this interest group, you have to be like part of the AFL and CIO. So it's private, it's not open to anybody. And not surprisingly, private interest groups, their main goal is try to look out for their interest of specifically what they want. So the AFL and the CIO represent labor unions, and their goal is mainly to try to improve working conditions and better pay for workers around the country. So I went to their website, and they have quite a list of things that they are been influenced by over the time. The bill, like the 1912 bill creating the Department of Labor passes, and you can sit here and basically scroll through these, and they're absolutely pivotal as you go through of rights that the AFL and CIO are claiming that their interest groups have forced through Congress in order to help workers over time. So this, again, this is a screenshot from their website of what they claim that they have been influential in over time. Another prime example of what a private interest group is the American Medical Association. This private interest group, you have to be a doctor to be in this interest group. And so the American Medical Association is very key in what policies are going through, what's going to affect them. I went through and glanced, and this is from their website. A lot of their historical stuff, because I'm not a doctor, I know you're shocked. You're like, I can't believe he's not a doctor. But a lot of these, I'm not really sure what their influence. Like, these are obviously very beneficial for the American Medical Association, or they wouldn't put it on their website. I don't know enough about them all to really expand on it, but obviously the American Medical Association is made up of doctors and are very influential, looking out for their own particular interests. So private interest groups, who are they looking out for? For themselves. I mean, that's, they could be large like the CIO and AFL, but at the end of the day, they're really trying to push in legislation that's going to benefit themselves, and not just anybody can join their interest group. You have to have some type of criteria depending on how they set that up. So the question is, what is the purpose of private interest groups? And you can basically just talk about interest groups in general. Like, what's the purpose of them? And we talked about that, of what they're trying to influence and why they're trying to do that. So pause me, answer this completely, and we're moving on. All right, so private interest groups, now we're moving into another type of interest groups, special interest groups. Special interest groups promote an ethical group, age, gender, religion, or other special issue. There's a handful of them that we're going to talk about here. Not surprising, there's African Americans, women, the AARP, the American Association of Retired People, the National Rifle Association. We're going to talk about these. The NAACP, now AARP, these are representing groups of people who have felt like they have been marginalized, and for the most part, you can about not say felt like they have been marginalized for a lot of history, and they created a group to try to better government advocacy for themselves. So the first one here is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. The NAACP's main goal is to make sure that African Americans aren't being discriminated against in the government, present day. Now, the NAACP was founded, and I pulled this off their website, so it's their wording. So lynching, which is murdering people, is just a hate crime. Lynching is going out and murdering somebody. Lynching was common. That's a whole story for civil rights in American history. It absolutely happened. It was common. Yes, it was a terroristic tactic by groups like the KKK and things like that, and other hate groups. Lynching was not actively pursued. If somebody got lynched, if somebody got murdered, if it was a black person that got murdered, a lot of times there's like no investigation into it, and if it was treated just as like a mob rule type situation. The NAACP, realizing they were being targeted in these lynchings in the South in the early 1900s and the late 1800s, the NAACP comes out basically by the 1920s and the 1930s to make lynchings illegal. That's right. If that shocked you, it should. If you're like, well, why is he pausing like it's shocking? That's right. They made lynchings illegal. Yeah. Because it wasn't before that. Obviously, it was against the law in other aspects. The actual term lynching was used. The NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, came out in order to pressure Congress to have lynchings made illegal. So that's how the NAACP kind of got founded. They're still a very powerful organization today. Another group is the National Organization for Women. So the National Organization for Women, you were like, well, we talked about the 19th Amendment as the women's right to vote. The National Organization for Women actually comes out after after women had the right to vote. It actually comes out in the 60s and in the 70s. One of the big things that now the National Organization for Women have gotten passed is equal representation in college sports. Because there's a certain amount of money set aside to allow college athletes to have free college. Well, that was almost going exclusively to men, and so women did not have the same access to scholarships that men did. Now, the National Organization for Women is going to push for the policies that will lead to what is called Title IX, which gives the same amount of money divvied up for men and women's athletics in college to present day. And then the AARP, interestingly enough, this is like the first one that's not a circle. I thought that was all the symbols are circles for everybody, except for the AARP. The American Association for Retired People is the AARP. And they, this is from their website, fights for the Older Americans Act of 1965. This is the founder, I believe. I shouldn't say that. This is Dr. Ethel Percy Andrus from the AARP. What's important about this, and they don't really mention it here, this is where Medicare is going to come out, which is like health insurance for retired people. It's going to come out at this time period under Lyndon B. Johnson. Very influential group, the AARP. But again, they're working behind the scenes, not trying to get people elected. Once people are elected, they are pressuring individual Congress people and senators to pass legislation and approve legislation that benefits their specific interest. Probably one of the most well-known groups is the National Rifle Association, the NRA. The NRA is fundamentally connected to the idea that the Second Amendment says you can have guns, You can't take our guns. So I went through to find the legislation that the NRA accomplished, and at first I was like, oh my gosh, there's very little legislation that the NRA. I think that seems odd. Like all these other groups, you saw it had these massive lists of things that they had gotten accomplished, but the NRA doesn't seem to have that. I was like, what is going on? Then I realized, the Constitution, the Second Amendment of the Constitution says you have the right to bear arms. The Constitution says you can have guns. So they're not fighting for additional rights. A lot of what the NRA does is trying to fight against laws that would limit what they perceive is their right in the Second Amendment. So the NRA, I'm sure because they're all over the news when it comes to gun laws and gun regulation, and they didn't have the big list on their website. They have a whole separate section. So the NRA you can join, and then a whole other section of just them dealing with policy. So very large interest group. But the question here is, what are some of the influences special interest groups have had on legislation over the years? So you can talk about anything that we talked about there, or if you know something in particular. I'm game to always learn something new. So answer that in complete sentences, and we're going to move on. All right, public interest groups. Public interest groups are open to anybody, and these generally are nonpartisan. Most of those other groups that we talked about are usually pretty strongly either all Republican or all Democrat. Pretty much across the board, the ones that we've talked about, they're either going to be one political party or the other. Public interest groups are like, no, anybody can join. There's no exclusivity. We want Republicans, we want Democrats, we want Libertarians, we want Green Party, we want everybody, all right? So these are usually issues that affect large groups of people in the United States. The League of Women Voters is a very famous one, which basically says, hey, regardless of you're Republican, Democrat, or all this other stuff, we need to get together and make sure that women in general aren't being denied the right to vote. And then probably one of the more famous ones is MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, who fight to have legislation passed that will help prevent drunk driving deaths because car accidents is such a leading cause of young men and women, and alcohol is a leading cause of fatal accidents. MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, they don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, anything. You can join. You can either be a father and join Mothers Against Drunk Driving. That is a public interest group. So a public interest group is trying to change rules that affect everybody. Whereas a special interest group, they're focused on like one specific interest, and they're trying to persuade the people and the politicians in one specific way. And that is a special interest group, cares about their one special interest, and is usually pretty exclusive on who can join that. Whereas public interest groups are open to anybody, and it's designed to try to benefit everybody on a topic that would affect a lot more people than just a very small specific section of people. So that's what the question is. What is the difference between the public interest group and a special interest group? So pause me, answer that, and then we're going to move on. So in what way do interest groups try and influence the government? This is going to seem almost crazy, all right? Because as I was researching this, I was like, wait a minute, I thought I understood this, but I did not. So let's talk about lobbyists. So there used to be, when these special interest groups first came out, they would literally sit outside where the House of Representatives and the senators, especially when they're in committees and they're talking about stuff. And so these people would sit outside in the hallway, in the lobby, is literally where the term comes from the lobby. They would sit in the lobby and they would wait. And they'd wait till the day was over, whatever, and the senator comes walking out, and they're just sitting there because they know the senator has to walk by, or the representative has to walk by. And then they run over to them and they start pitching their idea because they're representing a special interest group. All right. So all these people that would just sit in the lobby and wait. They're waiting to, watch this senator walk by. Like, it's nothing official. This is like walking in the hallways. And they want to run over to him and be like, hey, got an idea for you. I want you to introduce this or that. those people get called lobbyists because we're in the lobby of the Washington Hotel. Is really, there's an actual, they know where the name came from, which lobby it actually was. So they're called lobbyists. I knew that, but when I started doing research, I was a little surprised about what I found, because I'd never really thought about it. So I'm going to drop this knowledge on you. So lobbyists, all right, they are basically like lawyers. So I just thought a lobbyist was just a term for somebody that stood out there. No, this is like an official job. And so they have like a law firm, pretty like a lawyer would have a law firm. There's like a lobbyist firm that actually exists in like Washington, D.C. There's actual lobbyist firms. I had never thought about it, but I guess that makes sense. So if you're a special interest group, you hire a lobbyist. Now, they don't necessarily go sit in the lobby anymore, but they hire these lobbyists to present their ideas and try to encourage representatives to pass these ideas that they want to have through Congress. Now, lobbyist is, you can pay a lot of money if you're a lobbyist. Typically lobbyists, this is not their first career. I doubt anybody is. Sometimes they're retired Congress people. Sometimes they are well known in the area for one thing or other. Because you have to know all the ins and outs of how laws get passed, because a lobbyist has to be there to try to get their bill passed by whoever is paying them money. A special interest group hires a lobbyist, and you want to hire the best lobbyists. These lobbyists can make a ton of money. If you're a special interest group, and you're like, hey, I want to hire a lobbyist, you go to a firm that like gets rents out lobbyists, like a law firm, and you like talk to lobbyists. It costs, this is a crazy amount of money, $50,000 a month that you have to pay to a lobbyist firm to have a lobbyist lobby for you and try to convince these senators or House of Representatives to put in these bills. So, and this graph, and when I first saw this, I was like, this can't be true. And this actually is. So special interest groups cannot just give politicians money. That is, the politicians get in trouble for that. Because you can't just buy votes. That's bad. But since lobbyists are on like a registrar, so all lobbyists have to register with the federal government. So the federal government knows these guys, they keep an eye on them, they see what they're doing. Special interest, and it's a little more complicated than they show here. Special interest can give lobbyists money, or especially the lobbyist firm that helps out the politician. So if you have a lobbyist, you can basically influence a lot of stuff with money. And as we've already talked about in this unit, money is key. So lobbyists are basically the spearhead of these special interest groups in order to get the senators and people in the House of Representatives to do what they want. And you're like, okay, but what if the senator's like, I don't wanna? What if it's a dumb idea? Then they're just gonna say no and walk away. Like, why would they do that? This is crazy. To getting in Congress and staying in Congress, it takes a lot of money. On average, a candidate, all right, you have to raise on average $14,000 a day, 7 days a week, in order to have enough money to run a campaign. $14,000 a day. Senators don't make that. I'm gonna make that. I think they make less than $200,000. I could be wrong on that. In the federal government. So $14,000 a day, 7 days a week. All right, and they don't use their own money. Where is all this money coming from? Special interest groups. Special interest groups come out and say, hey, we got to put a bill in that legalizes the, I don't know, making a robot buffalo. We're going to make robot buffalo. It's a little questionable ethically, all right, because we're going to take a robot and a buffalo. We're going to make them have robot buffalo babies. We need a law passed through that says that's okay. Because right now, based on blah, 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 we can't do it. So this guy's like, it seems dumb. And they're like, we will pay for your next election. And this guy's like, oh. All right. So what he'll do, because most people don't care about robot buffalo until there's billions of them. Anyway, so what this representative will do is he usually waits till a really popular bill comes by. Like something everybody's like, hooray, like, kids get high fives bill. So something where everybody's cool with it. And he will slip that on there. It's called a rider. And when they approve the other bill, that part, because nobody cares enough about it, isn't going to object to the good bill because there's one little part added on, and that then becomes law. If you look at riders on bills, basically really popular bills, there's all these like random things at the end, like, is that a robot buffalo law? Why would that exist? Because lobbyists are good at their job, and they know who to talk to, when to talk to them, and what to promise them. To get a seat in the House of Representatives is $1.6 million. That is how much the average campaign runs. You don't have to buy the seat, but if you're not spending money to advertise, you're not going to be able to do it. So the special interest groups themselves don't go talk to these representatives. It's these lobbyists. And that is an elite job for people who really know their way around. And there's quite a bit of shows that deal with politics talking about lobbyists, because that's a pretty crazy job that pays a very good amount of money. But generally speaking, lobbyists are people who are like retired Congress people, or people that know their way around, and they know what the laws are with money. Because the last thing a lobbyist can do is get his special interest group in trouble because he was illegally, or he or she was illegally dealing with money. So they know what the rules are, they know how to manipulate the rules, they know how to get around it, and they know how to get what they want, and it completely bypasses the voter all the way through. So special interest groups get a lot of stuff done because they are like, if voting is a hammer, this is like a little needle. They know right where to poke, right where to go in, and get their special interest met by directly talking to individual candidates and how it works out. So that's kind of the end there. I thought that was crazy. That's how voting in the government works without voters sometimes. So the question here is, what is a lobbyist and what are their jobs? And we just got done talking about that. So pause me, answer that. You have to pause me because it's over. Hope you liked it.